Let's go ahead and talk just a little bit about how England takes a turn that's different from the rest of Europe. While the rest of Europe is heading down a totalitarian path, a more of an absolute monarch type of path, with guys like Peter the Great, Frederick the Great, Louis the Sun King, England begins a turn more towards representative government, where the power is being allocated by Parliament, is being condensed into a Parliament, into a representative form of government. Why does that happen? I believe that happens in part because of a crisis in succession. You have the Tudor Monarchy, or the Tudor family, which arises to the throne with Henry VII, and his son Henry VIII is desperate to produce a male heir, so that he avoids this crisis in succession. So much so that Henry VIII, his first wife Catherine, has several miscarriages. She has 6 pregnancies, only one of which results in a child, and that's Mary. So Henry is left without a male heir. As a result, he actually creates his own church. He breaks away from the Catholic Church because the Pope won't grant him a divorce, and he divorces Catherine of Aragon, who was the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabel. And so this is the beginning of the Anglican Church, and it's generally considered part of the Protestant Reformation. And he goes ahead and marries Anne Boleyn. He ends up, after actually several marriages, producing a male heir, Edward VI. But Edward VI is sickly, he's weak, he doesn't last long. He rules for, I believe it was 6 years, and he dies. And this is where the crisis comes. In fact, there was even a crisis with Edward. Was Edward even a legitimate child? Did he have a legitimate claim to the throne because he wasn't the product of Henry's marriage that was recognized by the Roman Catholic Church? And so right even from the get-go, Edward has issues of legitimacy with his succession to the throne. Mary has her own issues. While she is the child of Henry's recognized marriage, at least recognized by the church, to Catherine, Mary is a woman, and there had never been a woman that rises to the throne. But she does, but she's not popular. She wants to go ahead. She's raised by Catherine. She's a devout Roman Catholic. Henry had moved the country into the direction of the Protestant camp, and she wants to bring it back to Catholicism. And when the clergy resist her on that, she ends up burning 300 of them at the stake. And for that, she earns the nickname Bloody Mary. So her reign is relatively short, and she's relatively unpopular. The next child, and this is the next child of Henry, so Henry has 3 of his children that end up sitting on the throne, is Elizabeth I. She's a lot like Henry. She is somebody who's well-liked by the people, even though she herself could be pretty harsh. She made laws that if you weren't Protestant, if you didn't attend church, you had to pay a fine. She ends up going ahead and beheading her own cousin, who is Mary, the Queen of Scots. She imprisons her and beheads her because Mary is working with the Spanish monarch, Philip II, to go ahead and overthrow Elizabeth, because Mary's Catholic and Elizabeth is Protestant. Philip the second is so tired of Elizabeth, and not only the beheading of Mary, but the defeat or the sea dogs, the pirates that are plaguing Spanish shipping, that he sends the Spanish Armada to conquer England and to dethrone Elizabeth. The Spanish Armada is defeated in part by these same sea dogs: Sir William Drake, Sir Walter Raleigh, Sir John Hawkins, and the Spanish Armada is defeated. And this really is the ascendancy of the English Navy and the beginning of their reputation and domination of the global seas. But Elizabeth dies without an heir as well, and this is really the end of the Tudor line. And when Elizabeth dies, they need another king, and the next available successor who is in the royal family is James I. Ironically enough, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots. And so, again, another Catholic on the throne. And this is the beginning of the Stuart line. And so, again, now you have this whole question, okay, is this a legitimate heir? Is this a legitimate, this is somebody coming in from outside, still part of the same family, but still Roman Catholic. So now there's definitely a split between the population, which is more Protestant, and the monarchy, which is more Catholic. And that split only worsens under the successor to James, Charles I. Charles definitely butts heads and goes head to head with Parliament on a lot of different issues, especially in regards to Roman Catholicism. And Parliament never trusts him, as is evidenced with the uprising in Ireland, where they know they need an army to go ahead and put down an Irish revolt, but the Irish are mostly Roman Catholic, and they don't trust that Charles will do that. And this ends up leading to a civil war because the Parliament tries to take over the military. Charles says no way. and they end up going ahead and fighting over it. This is really a war between Charles and what's called the Long Parliament. It was a parliament controlled by Europeans that meets periodically over 20 years, and so this is a very contentious relationship. Eventually, Charles loses. He's beheaded. He loses to an army that is headed up on the part of Parliament by Oliver Cromwell. The soldiers in this army, these are mostly Puritans here, are called the Roundheads, and Oliver Cromwell gets the title Lord Protector. And Oliver Cromwell doesn't want to be king, doesn't want to be a dictator. He tries on a couple of different occasions to set up a commonwealth, or what today we would term as a republic, where you don't have a monarch, where you have an elected form of government that is really in control. But nonetheless, Oliver Cromwell finds Parliament to be just as difficult to work with as the king did, and he ends up doing the same thing that the king does. He goes ahead and disbands them, even though they had a written constitution at this point. It was called the Instrument of Government, which was really the first written constitution anywhere in Europe that kind of outlines what the government's job is, what the government looks like, what the government's made of. And so the Instrument of Government under Oliver Cromwell really becomes a model for constitutional government. Nonetheless, even though this lasts for a little while, it eventually falls apart. And after the death of Oliver Cromwell, his son is not able to maintain the allegiance of the military, and the English citizenry is fed up with the rule of the Puritans, and so they ask for a king back. And sure enough, Parliament comes together, and they ask Charles II, the son of Charles I, who had been beheaded in this English Civil War, to go ahead and come back. Charles II had been in exile in France, and Charles II accepts. And so this is really the beginning of the constitutional monarchy, which is what England has today. It's called a constitutional monarchy. Charles II, not anything like James or Charles I. He goes along to get along. He's Roman Catholic, but he's willing to, if Parliament and he are button heads, he's willing to go ahead and let Parliament have its way, and he'll kind of work the back channels if he can. But he's kind of known, his reputation, it's called the Merrie Monarch, because he definitely likes to have a good time. One of the things that people didn't like in England about the Puritans was they did go ahead and limit things like the theater. They felt that was sinful, and there were a lot of people in England who wanted that stuff back. And Charles brings it back, and it's one of the reasons he's popular. And he doesn't buck the Parliament too much. So he gets the reputation as the Merrie Monarch. His younger brother then, after Charles dies, he dies without an heir. His younger brother, James II, comes to the throne. And James is not like Charles. James is not going to go along to get along. He is a devout Roman Catholic. He is going to try to move the country back towards Catholicism. So much so that really Parliament becomes distrustful of him. You have two basic camps that develop in Parliament. These are the political parties, the forerunners of the political parties that you find in England today. Back in the day, they were the Tories and the Whigs. The Tories, otherwise known as the Catholic Outlaws, that's basically, Tory comes from an Irish word meaning Catholic outlaw. And then you had the Whigs, which was a Scottish term for horse thieves. So none of these two were particularly flattering names. And on the one side, you had the Tories, who were more in favor of a legitimate succession. You can't just overthrow the king. The Whigs were more of your Puritans. So the Tories, Anglicans, and Catholics. Whigs were more your Puritans. And the Whigs would say, we can overthrow the king anytime we want. And so these are the two different political parties. The Tories being more conservative, the Whigs being more liberal. And this ends up leading to, eventually, both of them get fed up with James, and they kick him out. And this is known as the Glorious Revolution. Glorious because it's a bloodless revolution. James II abdicates without a fight, without a shot being fired. And then the Parliament does invite in William and Mary to ascend to the throne. Again, this is seen as an acceptable compromise. On the one hand, the Whigs get to make their case that, hey, we kick the monarch out, we invite a monarch in. But Mary is actually the daughter of James II. And so the Tories say, well, yes, that may be so, but this is still the line of succession, where we're following the line of James II here. And so that's why this is a little bit of a compromise position. William, who is from the Netherlands, Mary, who is the daughter of James, and so they come and they rule together as co-regents. It's also during this time that you get the British developing a lot of their ideas about government philosophically. Guys like John Locke writes a book, Two Treatises on Government, where he outlines what it's the job of government, what rights do people have. You have guys like Thomas Hobbes, who says there's basically a social contract between government and the people. Government has certain things it's supposed to do. The people have certain obligations they're supposed to meet. And he writes a book called Leviathan that describes a lot of his ideas about government. You get the development of habeas corpus, which is basically the right to be known what you're accused for. You can't just be imprisoned indefinitely and not know why. They have to tell you why you're imprisoned. England passes their Bill of Rights during this time, so you really get a lot of ideas coming out about how government is to operate. It's also during this time that England becomes really the United Kingdom. They bring in Scotland. Scotland and England unite under the Act of Union, and this is done in large part to try to keep Scotland from allying with France. There was some tension with France at this point, and so they're trying to keep everything together on the island. And so now you don't have just England and Wales. You have England, Wales, you have Scotland, parts of Ireland, and so this is really, the Act of Union is where you get what today we would call the modern United Kingdom. It's more than just England. And this is also the beginning, this same time period, of England becoming an empire. The empire is ascendant. It's on the rise, if you will. All the way back to Henry VII, who sends John Cabot out just a few years after Columbus to go ahead and explore North America. And John Cabot goes ahead and sails along the coast of what today would be Newfoundland, and claims that for the English. You get the Sea Dogs going out, Sir Francis Drake, Sir Walter Raleigh, Sir John Hawkins, who were basically pirates. They definitely served to disrupt the trade of especially the Dutch, the Portuguese, and the Spanish. But they're also explorers. Sir Walter Raleigh coming to what would be the English colonies, Sir Francis Drake becoming the first English sea captain to circumnavigate the world or sail all the way around the world. Sir Francis Drake, Sir Walter Raleigh, all happening there, all participate in the battle with the Spanish Armada and are decisive in that. Sir Francis Drake, it's rumored as always kind of Queen Elizabeth's favorite. She kind of favored him, and there was always this relationship. This rumor about their relationship between the two. You also, at this time, get the development of the East India Company, which is really how India goes about colonizing most of the world. They don't do it necessarily through direct military confrontation. They do it through the manipulation of trade, and they spread their empire in this manner. And the East India Company successfully manipulates the situation in India. By the time it's all said and done, the East India Company is collecting the taxes, they're running the railroads, they're running the justice system, they're running India. And they claim India for the British Empire. And Britain does this with many of the areas, China in particular. They manipulate the situation to their advantage. Other explorers at the time, Henry Hudson, who just like John Cabot was looking for the Northwest Passage, a route through so that you didn't have to sail all the way around the Americas. Could you get somehow through the Americas to get over to China and India? It's basically the same goal that Christopher Columbus had. Of course, there was no such thing. There was no Northwest Passage. There was no way through, at least not until we dug the Panama Canal. You get the very first colonies in what would become the United States developing during this time period as well, Jamestown and Plymouth. Jamestown in 1607, Plymouth in 1620. Jamestown founded primarily for economic gain, Plymouth founded by Puritans who were fleeing England because they felt like they were being oppressed and were not allowed to practice their religion as they saw fit back in Europe. And this expansion of the English power is what this left turn that happens where England turns a different direction. We might not think of it so significant today, except for the fact that when England became a global empire, their ideas about government influenced and spread around the rest of the world.